Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Jeff Short, and today we're going to be continuing our interaction with atheists. Last time we talked about Joe Rogan. We're going to follow up on that in part 2, but today we're going to take a break from Joe Rogan. We're going to deal with another atheist, and this one is a scientist, a popularizer of science named Neil De Grasse Tyson. He's on television, he's on radio, he's written books. He's all over the place, and he's a science popularizer, but unfortunately, he is an atheist. So he is going to be interviewed here in what we're going to watch today, and he's going to give some standard answers to his atheism. And so I want to deal with these standard answers because they've been around for a long time. They're nothing new. These are not groundbreaking. He's not plowing new ground here. He's simply regurgitating what he's heard in his atheistic readings. He's probably read Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and probably Bertrand Russell before that, and all kinds of atheistic evolutionary scientists. And so he's got his arsenal to the stock. He stocked it up. He's got his ammunition, and he's ready for interviews. But we want to take apart some of his arguments, and we want to look at them from a Christian perspective. You know, from the scriptures, from the Bible, it says in Psalm 14:1, it talks about, let me quote the verse, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." Psalm 14:1. So the Bible is very blunt. The Bible is very clear. If someone is an atheist, if they say there is no God, or if they're leaning toward that and they're saying, well, there probably isn't any God, they are labeled fools because they are blind. They are spiritually blind. They are intellectually blind. They are being blinded. They're losing the forest because of the trees. They can't see right out in front of their eyes. They're going to ask for evidence. We saw that last time with Joe Rogan, the atheist podcast interviewer. He says, well, show me a box full of evidence for Christianity. And Pastor Douglas Wilson retorted, well, right there in front of you. You have to be able and willing to look at the evidence, and you have to be able to be sensitive enough and see the evidence right before you. And if you can't see the evidence before you, then that's not a question of the intellect, it's a question of the will. So you are fighting against God because you have some other axe to grind with him. And that's usually almost 99% of the time the atheists have an axe to grind with God. There is something in their life, some experience, some reaction they had to some aspect of Christianity, whether it's attending a church or forced to go to a Christian boarding school. That's popular in England. You have a lot of bitter atheists in England who were forced to learn Christianity in boarding school. They hated it. If you look at Christopher Hitchens' brother, Peter Hitchens, he was forced to do that along with his brother, and Christopher Hitchens went on to become a world-famous atheist. Peter Hitchens started off as an atheist and became one in boarding school, but then turned to Christianity because he realized that God is right there in front of you. You just have to look. So let's look at Neil De Grasse Tyson. Let's bring up an interview that he had a few years back, and we're going to look at his arguments, take them apart, and discuss them from a Christian perspective. So let's jump into this.
Do you believe in God?
Me?
Creator?
Yeah, so I'm, the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all-powerful and all good.
So he's going to go into a standard, the problem of pain, the problem of evil, the problem of suffering. And he's going to say, having looked at all of the cosmos and he's an astrophysicist, so he looks at the stars a lot, and he's considering cosmic issues out there. He says, I haven't seen any evidence of God. It's kind of like the cosmonaut that went up into space for the first time. And someone asked him, did you meet God? And he said, no, I didn't see God at all. And then somebody retorted, well, why don't you take off your helmet from your spacesuit, then you'll meet God very quickly. So you're looking out in space, and you're not seeing some kind of evidence that you have in your mind. You have a conception of what God should appear as. And so he's saying, I looked out there and God doesn't meet my standard of what kind of evidence I demand of him. You get that? You get that arrogance. It's if Neil De Grasse Tyson, he is sitting in the jury and God is on the witness stand, and the lawyers are grilling God. So he's going to put God through the test, and he's going to sit back and he's going to judge God. He's going to say, you haven't provided evidence in the way I want, and so I don't believe in you.
That's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that?
Now, my question to Neil De Grasse Tyson is, don't you have a clue how Christians deal with that? Don't you have a clue? Have you not read any books by Christian thinkers, by Christian theologians, by Christian philosophers? Have you not done any research? Because you're acting as if this question that you're asking the interviewer is some profound, never asked before, never contemplated, gotcha question that you thought up sometime in your lifetime. You're acting as if there is no context. There are people who, for the last 2,000 years and even beyond that, have provided answers to the question of evil, the question of pain. Why are there bad things happening in the world? If there's a great God, if there's a good God, if there's an all-powerful God. And the answers are simply found in the Bible. Does he not know about what happened during the fall in the Garden of Eden? Does he not understand the story of Adam and Eve? Does he not understand what happened as a consequences of their disobedience to God? There was a cosmic, cataclysmic event that took place in the Garden of Eden as a result of Adam's fall, Adam's sin, Adam's rebellion. Cataclysmic event that affected all of humanity in the future through original sin. That's why we're all sinful. We're all guilty before God, even from a baby's womb, out of the mother's womb, he's guilty because he has original sin passed on. And not only humanity, but it's nature itself, it says in the book of Romans, groans to be released from the effects of the fall. So has he not studied Christian theology? Does he not understand that there are answers to these questions like he's asking? I guess he's going to depend on this interviewer not having any clue of any answers given over the 2,000 years of Christian thinking since Christ. And he's just going to float it out there and hope that nobody comes back with, Neil De Grasse, have you not read any of the replies? What's wrong with the reply? Try to interact with a real Christian thinker on this instead of just throwing it out there like it's never been asked before.
So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up.
Okay, so right now, he's being flippant. He's being mocking. He's being disrespectful. He's talking about God as the bearded man. This is a form of blasphemy, okay? And because there is a God, because God sees him, God knows him, God will judge him. And Jesus says, for every careless word you speak, you will be judged. And so Neil De Grasse Tyson right now can get away with being disrespectful to God. He can get away with being a big mouth and a smarty pants and someone who can utter blasphemies before God. He can get away with that right now because God is not judging the way he will in the end times, but he will not escape judgment forever. And so he had better humble himself, and he had better repent of his sarcasm toward God, because he needs to remember God is his judge. He is not God's judge. So he's acting as if he is sitting back and he's saying, okay, God, okay, you're on stage, and I judge your performance, kind of like American Idol. God gets up there and does a song and dance, and if Neil De Grasse Tyson is happy with God's performance, that's evidence for his existence, then Neil De Grasse Tyson gives him a high score. But if Neil De Grasse Tyson is not happy with God, then he gets, and another reference to TV, he gets the Gong Show. Neil De Grasse Tyson judges God. That's a wrong attitude. God judges man. Man doesn't judge God. This little puny speck on the planet Earth is trying to speak out to God in the universe, the great, almighty, powerful God, and saying, the old man in the sky, if I bump into him, I'll believe in him. That is absurdity, and you know it. And you're going into insanity when you talk to God like that, because you will have to answer to God for every casual, flippant thing you say toward him, and you better beware.
We're good to go, okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why.
There's no evidence of it. There's no evidence of God. There's no evidence of it. Only all the evidence in the world. The book of Romans talks about the heavens declare the glory of God. So here's a guy who looks up in the glory of the sky, looks in the heavens, see the intricate patterns out there, sees the wonder of it all, and can say with a straight face, I don't see any evidence of God. So in other words, everything you see in the heavens above and on the earth below, everything you see is just plain absurdity. There's no reason for it. There's no rhyme for it. There's no purpose for it. There's no meaning behind it. It's just there. And you think that's an intelligent conclusion? Well, the universe, it's just there. It just came there. It just happened. And then it probably will just go away. We have no reason to inquire anymore. Nothing to see here. It's just there. And that's the explanation. It's just there. That is absurdity. No, Christians are the intelligent ones. And they say, well, let's ask another question. Why is the universe there? Why does it have order? Well, he will say the laws of nature provide the order. Well, why are there laws of nature? What put the laws of nature in the natural process? Okay, when you start asking what it's there for, why it's there, the meaning and purpose behind it, then those are the questions that lead you to God, because you have to conclude, hey, this is very, very suspect. It just didn't happen. The universe doesn't just happen. There has to be some reason for it happening. And there has to be reason why there's intelligence in the universe. And that doesn't just happen. And so when you start exploring the really deeper question, you start coming to the conclusion, hey, there's probably an all-powerful intelligence out there that designed and created it. Now, Neil De Grasse Tyson may not like the way God is letting things happen. He may not like the fact that the fall messed up everything and sin has marred the creation of God. He may not like that, but that is the reason why everything is out of sorts right now. That's why people kill each other. That's why there's hate in the world. That's why there's injustice. That's even why that there are natural disasters that damage and hurt humans, because the world is not the way it should be. It wasn't the way it was created to be. But after this cosmic event called the fall in the Garden of Eden, this cosmic rebellion of man against God, and even before that, there was a cosmic rebellion of the angels, and the demonic portion of the angelic hosts rebelled against God. So sin is at the root of why things are not the way they should be. Sin is at the root of the explanation of why there's evil and pain and suffering in the world. And if you don't accept that answer, that's on you, because there is an answer for why things are the way they are. You just don't accept it, Neil De Grasse Tyson. You would rather play dumb and say, well, I just don't see God out there. Well, you're right. You don't see God out there because you refuse to look and listen and learn. And you already have your preconceived ideas that everything has to be a material cause or natural cause. You already believe that. And so you're not going to accept anything that would push against that.
Why religions are called faiths, collectively, because you believe something in the absence of evidence.
No, that is not the definition of faith. Again, this man may be highly educated in his little narrow field, but he doesn't know anything about philosophy. He doesn't know anything about religion. Because if he knew anything about religion, he would know that the definition of faith is not believing something in the absence of evidence. That is not the definition of faith. Faith is looking at everything. Faith is looking at and using your mind and using everything that you have available to you, evaluating a situation, and then in the absence of certainty, in the absence of absolute 100% mathematical certainty, going ahead and making a decision about something. You know, the people that sit on a jury, they look at everything that is presented to them, and they don't have 100% certainty about the decision that they have to make. They may be almost split, 50-50. Well, it could have been not, we don't know. But they have to make a decision. And they make a decision on faith. They step out without mathematical certainty, because few things in life are mathematical certainty. 2 + 2 is 4, 100%. But most decisions we have to make in life are not 100%. And so there is a faith element in almost everything. When you drive down a car, do you know that car's engine will not explode when you're driving down the highway? No, you don't. But you have to, by faith, get in that car and say, well, I don't know for certain that it won't, but I'm going to assume that it will. Or if you get up in an airplane, do you have 100% certainty? Do you know, have you looked at all the evidence of every plane you've ever boarded? Have you inspected the engine? Have you looked at all the parameters, safety parameters of that thing? And have you checked it out? No. You get on that plane, and by faith, you assume or you conclude through whatever mechanism you do make choices with that it's okay. You exercise faith enough to get on that airplane. Well, it's the same way with believing in God. You look at everything. You look at the universe, you look at the sky, you look at your life, you look at what the Bible says about human nature. It says we're all fallen and sinful and separated from God. You go, yeah, that describes me. I rebel against God's laws. I sin and I feel bad. You look at everything, what the Bible's telling you, what the world of nature is telling you, and then you make a choice. And that is the faith choice. That is the faith decision. It isn't like a scientist going to the laboratory and testing this theory and then testing this theory. I think Neil De Grasse Tyson has so loaded his definition of faith. Faith, he says, is believing in the absence of evidence. Wrong. That's nobody's faith. That's nobody's definition of faith. That's his own one-sided, fully loaded definition of faith. And the interviewer just doesn't seem to have any pushback in her to try to say, well, wait, that doesn't sound like the faith definition that I'm familiar with. Where did you come up with that? Ask him to cite his sources. Who says faith is that definition? That is not the definition of faith. Absence of evidence is faith. No, that is not the evidence and the definition of faith. Wrong, Neil De Grasse Tyson.
That's what it is.
No, it isn't.
Why it's called faith.
No, it
Otherwise
isn't. Says who? Says you. That is not faith. It doesn't mean the absence of evidence. You could have lots of evidence. Is there evidence for aliens right now? Well, I would say that there are no aliens visiting us, but there are people who look at evidence, quote, evidence, and say, yeah, there's evidence. And I would not deny that there's no evidence for aliens and their existence, but I would just say that the evidence is not enough to get me to put my faith in that proposition that there are aliens. And so he's trying to say, in order to say that you have faith in aliens, that they exist, that there has to be no evidence for them, and then that would mean you have to exercise your faith. No, he's wrong in his definition. He doesn't cite any sources, so I'm just assuming he made that up.
Call all religions evidence, but we don't, for exactly that reason. So I'm given what everyone describes to be the properties that would be expressed by an all-powerful being in the gods that they worship. I look for that in the universe and I don't find it.
You look for that in the universe and you don't find it. Well, maybe you are not opening your eyes to the evidence that is right before you. You obviously don't know the Christian theology that's taught in the Bible. And so why are you talking about the problem of evil if you don't know the Christian answers that are given for that problem? So if you're saying, well, I look at the evidence and I don't see any, well, right, because you haven't read up. You're not educated on the conversation. In other words, you've entered into a conversation, Neil De Grasse Tyson, on a subject that you are not educated on. You don't know the opponent's position. And in this case, he's an atheist arguing against, we would presume, like a Christian. You don't know the opponent's responses. You throw questions out there, but you don't take the time to investigate and read up and educate yourself in their response, in your opponent's response. So there you don't know the opponent's response, or you act like you don't know the opponent's response. So yeah, you look out there and you don't see any evidence because you're not looking in the right places. If you look in the writings of Richard Dawkins, if you look in the writings of Steven Pinker, if you look in the writings of Christopher Hitchens, if you look in the writings of Carl Sagan, I could go on with these atheist scientists. If you look and you read all their books, yeah, you're not going to get the answer to the problem of evil. But why don't you try reading some other people's books? Why don't you try entering into the real conversation that should be taking place? And why don't you show some evidence that you have even read them and know anything about what their response would be? No, he's just going to throw these things out there and just hope nobody calls him on it. But I'm calling him on it today. Neil De Grasse Tyson, if you're going to throw out these, like the problem of evil, why don't you show us that you have heard any other responses rather than just act like you're the only one that's ever thought that?
So I remain unconvinced. But if you've got some good evidence, bring it, bring it, okay? And
so here's the problem, and here's the attitude he has. He is a sinner, according to the Bible. He is a fallen member of the human race, just like everybody else. Okay, he's a sinner. He's in rebellion against God. He doesn't acknowledge that, but he really is. He wants to live his own life. He wants to be free to sin. He wants to be free to do whatever he wants to do. He doesn't want anyone looking over his shoulder. He certainly doesn't want to have an all-knowing being checking up on him at every instance. And so he has all kinds of reasons for rejecting God. And yet he, as the sinner, is going to sit back and say, just show me the evidence, God. So in other words, he's asking God to perform for him. And that's the wrong attitude. The right attitude is humility and saying, you know what, I don't know everything. I'm pretty well educated in my field, and a lot of people think that I'm really smart, he thinks, but I have to admit that I don't know everything, and therefore I could be wrong. And so I need to do a lot more thinking, and I need to do a lot more investigating, and I need to be open to hearing people and their arguments rather than just throwing up objections. Okay, right now he thinks he's pretty smart. He thinks he's pretty smug. He's like, well, I just don't see any evidence for it. Just show me. If you've got it, show it to me. Okay. Well, how about starting by reading some real Christian theologians on the problem of evil? How about reading some of the major Christian philosophers on the subject of evil? Oh, just how about reading some of the classical works on the problem of evil, like St. Augustine, or even some of the more contemporary philosophers of Christianity, like Dr. Craig, and some of the philosophers that come from the Christian Philosophical Society, for example. My old mentor at Wheaton College, Arthur Holmes, some of the other people, Alvin Plantinga. Have you not heard of these people? They have all addressed these issues. So humble yourself and get out of this attitude that God has to show you that you're in the jury box and God is on the stand and he's being charged and God has to perform for you and he has to show you. No, you have to humble yourself and be willing to listen to what the Christian gospel is. You have to be willing to understand what the fall of man is and how that disrupted nature and how things are not the way they are because of the fall of human beings, and how we're all sinners, and how because of that rebellion, we are bent toward rebellion with God, and how we come up with our own arguments to try to disprove God because we don't want God to be looking over our shoulder. We want to be totally autonomous and free people who do whatever we want to do. We don't want to have to give accountability to any higher power. And so we have every reason in the world to try to disprove God and to not see him, even if he's right there. We have every motivation to try to get away from God. And so as sinners, we are trying to get away from God. We're trying to run away from God. And Neil De Grasse Tyson is trying to run away from God in his intellect. And he needs to humble himself and come before God and say, I'm sorry, I'm a sinner, I need Jesus Christ, and go from there. So I hope that's been helpful. We'll talk to you next week on another edition of the program. God bless.